Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
All right, 5 minutes after 9 o'clock. It looks a little better out there than it did earlier today. Yeah. The weatherman says this is going to be a rainy one. So right now it doesn't look too bad, though, right?
No.
Coming in off the Gulf, going to cross the state. So look for rain if you are heading to the theme parks. It might be a welcome thing, you know?
I think
sometimes in June at the theme park, it's horribly hot, right?
Yeah, it is. It's a refresher when it pours.
So the other day we saw a trailer for the movie Downton Abbey. Is that what it's called? And everybody's excited about this movie. And I remember watching the series with you, thinking, I wonder what's next. You know, you feel like you get to know these people and you kind of follow their world, right?
Exactly.
Our next guest has written a book that follows the world of real people. These are the Kennedys, and if you look at just the description of the book, you say, "Wow, I didn't know that." There's so much just in the description, and this is a huge book. We've had Randy Taraborrelli on the phone with us before with his previous book, which you said is being made into a TV series.
Yes,
is that right?
It's pretty amazing. Jackie, Janet, and Lee. So this is cool.
So he's got a new book called The Kennedy Heirs. He is on the phone. Let's say good morning to Randy Taraborrelli, I think is pronouncing his name right. I don't know. Good morning, Randy. How you doing?
Good morning. It's good to be back. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, good. Where are you calling from?
I am in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, on my book tour.
Nice.
Is it fun? This has got to be fun for you because everybody, the Kennedys are kind of like our own real life Downton Abbey, aren't they?
Yeah, they really are. It's sort of a good way of looking at them. I'm a big fan of Downton Abbey too. I can't wait for September to see the movie. And yeah, the Kennedys are sort of America's royal family in many ways, and it's been such a great pleasure to write about them for the last 22 years of my life.
Do we have anybody in the wings that will be another politically involved Kennedy?
Well, Joe Kennedy, who is Joseph Kennedy III's son, is really somebody that I think a lot of people are looking forward to seeing what will happen politically from him. Mm-hmm. He gave the Democratic response to President Trump's State of the Union address last year, and he really came across as somebody who might have a real future. Maybe even in the presidency, we'll see. And then Caroline Kennedy's son, Jack Schlossberg, is somebody who's been very involved with the JFK Museum and with the Profiles in Courage Awards. And he's somebody that people are looking forward to seeing a possibility from as well.
Was she closer to her mother? Was Caroline closer to Mrs. Schlossberg than she was to Jackie?
No, I wouldn't say she was closer to Mrs. Schlossberg, but I'm happy to talk about that for just a second because I was trying to find a new way to bring Caroline Kennedy into focus, something that would be interesting that people would never have considered before. And it crossed my mind a couple years ago that who'd ever imagine that Caroline had a mother-in-law?
Right, exactly.
Jackie looms so big in the lives of all the Kennedys that you never think about the fact that those who married had mothers-in-law.
That's right.
And relationships with other people who were not Kennedys. And so I wanted to write about that in this book, and it's a really nice relationship. And May Schlossberg is such an interesting person. This is Ed's mother, and I love writing about these characters who intersect with the Kennedys, and who aren't actually born Kennedy, but who sort of become Kennedy by osmosis.
Were you able to speak to any of the family at all in order to write the book?
Well, over the course of the last 22 years, I've interviewed probably most of the Kennedys, and going all the way back to even prior to my writing about the Kennedys, I interviewed JFK Jr., back in the 1990s for magazine articles. So I was able to draw from all of those interviews for this book, as well as from oral histories at the JFK Library and Museum and in the Edward Kennedy Institute, these oral histories were so revealing to me and showed so much of the interaction between these family members.
And your book is broken up really into 2 books.
Yeah, thanks for noticing that. I really appreciate people who actually read my book. I love that. Yeah, part 1 is called Son of Camelot. Part 2 is Daughter of Camelot. Part 1 is really about JFK Jr., and part 2 is really about Caroline Kennedy, but all of the other Kennedys, intersect those stories in such an interesting way. So you really get a picture of about 29 different Kennedy heirs over the course of reading 500 pages of my book.
And it also seems there were bits and pieces in there about Ethel Kennedy, about words of wisdom that she would pass on to people entering her family, and that was pretty amazing.
Well, yeah, Ethel Kennedy is a character in this book that people have really loved, those who have read it already. She spans the entire book. I mean, she starts the book and she ends the book. And she's an amazing character, and I think that people are really going to love the fact that she is sort of the center of the story. She's the matriarch of the story, and you're right, her wisdom is very pervasive throughout the entire tale.
Tell us the story about the warning. Was it Carolyn warning Caroline, or who warned who not to take the fight that JFK Jr. was killed on?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, wasn't a warning. What happened was Carolyn, JFK's wife, really did not want to go to the Kennedy compound for the wedding of Rory Kennedy, who was Ethel's daughter. She just didn't have it in her. She was tired. She felt that she didn't fit in with the Kennedys, and she just didn't want to go. And so she asked Ethel Kennedy if it was okay if she begged off, and Ethel said, "Yes, you do not have to show up. Don't worry about it. It's fine." But then JFK Jr. changed her mind, and she went on that trip to sort of placate him, and as a favor to him, really, because he didn't want to go alone to the wedding. And then, of course, they both died in a plane crash on their way to that wedding. So it's such a sad story, but Ethel Kennedy's left wondering why Caroline got on the plane, because she thought they had an agreement that she wasn't going to go to the wedding.
Oh, okay. I guess that's why I thought there was like a dream somebody had or something, something of that nature.
Yeah, well, it wasn't. In a sense, you're right. It was an intuition that Carolyn Bessette had. She had an intuition not to go, and Ethel just really today wishes that she had listened to her gut.
And you do use the word demons. I mean, even throughout all of the tragedy that happened. They also had to deal with suicide and then cancer.
Well, one of the stories that I told in the book that's never been told before is the story of Cara Kennedy, who was Ted Kennedy's daughter, and I love this story because it's such a fascinating, in many ways inspirational story. She was given a death sentence in her early 40s. Told that she had lung cancer and that she would not survive it. And, through a series of actions that she took that I outlined in the book, what she called her strategy for healing, she did survive that lung cancer. But then 8 years later, she succumbed to a heart attack because of the chemo that she was given in order to treat the cancer. So it's a sad story, but it shows the sort of duality of the Kennedy curse in many ways, that it does tend to get you, I mean,
it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah,
life is interesting. Life is interesting when any of our lives. I mean, we all have interesting lives, but then we're not all, we're not all interesting to everybody else, but for some reason the Kennedys are. How does Taylor Swift fit into this story?
Well, after Connor Kennedy, who is Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s son, after his mom, Mary Richardson Kennedy, Bobby's wife, committed suicide, Taylor Swift went to the Kennedy compound that summer, 2012, at the invitation of Ethel Kennedy. Because Taylor is a huge Kennedy fan, and she had written a song for Ethel Kennedy that was sort of a tribute to Ethel's relationship with Bobby Kennedy. The song is called Starlight, and it's on Taylor Swift's album, which is called Red. But anyway, she was at the Kennedy compound that summer, and she and Connor had a relationship, a romantic sort of summer fling that many people in the Kennedy family felt helped Connor deal with the recent suicide of his mom. So this is a story that I told in the book that I thought was really interesting.
That is interesting,
and you do get to experience Kennedy culture through Taylor Swift's eyes, which is sort of an unlikely way of experiencing it. Which made it a really good story for me to tell.
The book is really doing well. I'm looking at the reviews on Amazon. It's currently #1 in biographies of the rich and famous. That's pretty cool. You always hit it out of the park, though. Let's see. It's on the top of the charts on a couple of different categories, and you're getting good reviews from your readers. Do you find that there are new Kennedy fans? I guess it's a cheap word, I guess, but people who are suddenly interested in the Kennedys that may not have even been around for most of this story?
I do find that, it's a very good question, and I count on that. I count on bringing the Kennedys to a new generation, and I think that the story is so universal that it resonates with people of all ages. And certainly the Taylor Swift connection brings the Kennedy heirs to a younger generation of people, which is why I included the Taylor Swift story, because I wanted to be sure to expose the Kennedys to people that may not have known anything about them in the past. And I get a lot of fan mail from people who are not familiar with the Kennedy history, and the first exposure to that history is through one of my books. So I really appreciate that, and I really value it.
Why do you suppose that we don't have another person who's been president who has, I'm sure, some interesting stories, but why haven't we had somebody who captures our interest in the way the Kennedys did? Obama might have even been one of the next ones to do that, but so far, I mean, I know Michelle wrote a book and that got a buzz, but we don't have anybody who's quite like the Kennedys. Is there a theory you might have about that?
I wonder about that too. I think it has to do with I think it has to do with sort of the. I actually think the tragedy is a big part of it. As I wrote in my book, the tragedy keeps us engaged, and it's a sad way of engagement, but. Our hearts go out to them. The empathy that we feel for the Kennedys, we feel for them, and that makes us want more of them.
It just seems that when you are speaking with people, you do have to interview them, but you don't really do it from an interviewer's perspective. You seem to be a very good conversationalist, and you make the person almost feel as if they're your friend when you're having these conversations, and it shows in your writing.
Oh, thank you for that. I really appreciate that, and I feel that intention is everything in this business. What is your intention, and what is it that you want to convey to your readers? And for me, I always sort of have advocated for my subjects. I don't write books about people that I don't admire. It's too much work, and it's too hard to write these books, to do so with a subject that you don't admire. And because I admire my subjects, I want my readers to love my subjects by the time they finish the book. I've often felt that if you're going to go through 550 pages of a J. Randy Taraborrelli book only to get to the end and not love the people that you have just written about and read about, it's a real shame, And so I'm different, I think, from a lot of writers who maybe have a different agenda. Not that it's a wrong agenda, but it's a different agenda. My agenda is I want my subjects to be loved by the time the reader finishes the book. That's always been my agenda.
And it seems that Caroline Kennedy is more successful and has more influence on people when she's involved with the arts in that kind of community than when she did her political run. It just seems like two opposite personalities.
Well, you're absolutely right. You know, it was a difficult run for her when she decided that she wanted to be a senator. A lot of people thought it was a wrong fit for her, an uneasy fit, and it was. But you know, as I wrote in the book, she had spent her entire life trying to find a way to serve, and that is what the Kennedy mandate has always been. You know, what are you going to do to serve? What are you going to do? And she thought that this was her opportunity, and she gave it everything that she had, only to find out that really she's not a politician. You know. However, she did find a way in when she became ambassador to Japan, and I think that was really an important time for her, and it gave her an opportunity to serve without the invasive nature of politics infringing upon, you know, her private life.
Did she establish the Kennedy Honors Award?
Yes, well, you know, she's instrumental in the Kennedy Honors. She didn't establish it. You know, Ethel Kennedy had a lot more to do with that than anybody else. But, you know, today, Caroline Kennedy and her family are very instrumental in all of that. And this has been our first exposure in a lot of ways to Jack Schlossberg, her son, Caroline's son, who's also been a big part of the Profile and Courage Awards and the Kennedy honors.
Can you talk about money a little bit, and to be more specific, is the money, like there's so many. I mean, if you trace the family back to, I guess the father, the grandfather, Joseph, that's the one who kind of the money thing started. Does the money just automatically become part of their lives, or do they actually have to work? Are they like royalty, where it's kind of a mystery? Where does the money always come from?
Well, you know, it's funny you asked that question. Back in the 1990s, they had what JFK Jr. called a fire sale, you know, which was basically the Kennedys sold the Merchandise Mart in Chicago, which they owned, and a lot of their other properties in real estate for hundreds of millions of dollars back in the 1990s. And the purpose of that was really to seed the next generation of Kennedys, the Kennedy heirs.
Really?
And their children as well. And that's what it's done. I mean, since that time, all the Kennedys that I wrote about in this book and their children benefit from the millions and millions of dollars that were the result of that sale. So to answer your question, they all have stipends and annuities, but that doesn't mean that they don't also work. You know, for instance, Robert Kennedy Jr. has been one of the country's leading environmentalists for at least 30 years. I mean, Carrie Kennedy, his sister, you know, she produces documentaries, and Patrick Kennedy, Ted's son, was a congressman for 30 years. I mean, these Kennedys have contributed a lot in and of themselves, but they don't necessarily have to work, but they do.
Does time erase any divide that is caused politically, like the bipartisan thing that you always hear about today, the divide in the political parties? It doesn't seem to be associated with past presidents as much as it does recent or current presidents, especially. But with the Kennedys, it even seemed like during John F. Kennedy's presidency, even at that point, now maybe I was too young to really pick up on it, but it just seems like that whole political divide is not part of who. We don't see that. We don't see John F. Kennedy as Democrat. We don't think of that. And we know he is or was, but it doesn't seem to matter to anybody.
Well, I think it's a really good point, and certainly Ted Kennedy was known for his ability to reach across the aisle. I mean, that was what Ted Kennedy did best, which was find bipartisan solutions to problems. The landscape today is very different. I would love to know what Ted Kennedy would think of today's landscape, and how sort of outraged he would be by the war, that is constantly being engaged in between Republicans and Democrats, and the way that it's stoked constantly by both sides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is a different world we're living in, and I don't think it's a better world at all. And I hope that in years to come, maybe we will find a way to reach across the aisle the way Ted Kennedy did, and JFK did, and Bobby as well, and maybe not be at odds in the way we are today.
And Maria Shriver is an interesting person. I come from Wisconsin, with Sergeant Shriver, and even though they were in the political, in the public eye, they weren't in the public eye. And it's really amazing how she has been able to be in that public eye, with her TV things, and then and then the First Lady of California. And now she seems to have disappeared, but she still is working behind the scenes.
Well, the Shrivers are all very interesting people, and I wrote a lot about them in this book. Because I had an opportunity over the years to interview Eunice Shriver, and I met Sergeant Shriver, and of course I've interviewed Maria over the years. They were raised in a different way than the Kennedys. The Kennedys are very competitive, and the Kennedys are more focused on politics, whereas the Shrivers were focused on human rights as activists. And Sergeant Shriver never cheated on Eunice ever, and that was a different way of living for, Kennedy men. And I just think that they're a deeply religious family, and, Maria obviously has had her trouble with Arnold, that perhaps she didn't have maybe the life skills to deal with, because her mother certainly never had to deal with those kinds of issues. But still, to this day, she and Arnold are not divorced. They are separated, but they're not divorced. And I think that says a lot about the way Maria feels about divorce and the way that she was raised by her parents.
So why do you think it is that Arnold is not really considered by the general public to be part of the Kennedy clan? Others that marry into the family, or am I wrong about that? It just doesn't seem like we view him as one of the Kennedy clan people,
Like Peter Lawford.
Yeah.
Sure. Like when I wrote the book, I started a section about the Schwarzeneggers and Arnold, and it was a little bit jarring because people do not consider him to be a Kennedy, but he's as much a Kennedy as anybody else who married into that family.
Right. Yeah.
If you think about it, he's as much a Kennedy as Jackie, or anybody else who took a Kennedy, as a spouse.
Plus, he had a successful political career. He was governor of California. That's pretty good.
Yeah, and I think it's because he's so made his own mark in the world. Maybe, yeah. And that we don't think of him as being anything other than Arnold because of who he's become as a figure.
Well, Randy, once again, you've hit it out of the park, and you've given us another great book. I would like to give the one you sent us away, so if I have a listener who would like it, call me right now, 622-9622, and I will leave it here for you. The rest of us have to buy it. I found it on Amazon. It's huge. It's 600-plus pages, more than 600 pages. Do you have a website you'd like to recommend?
Sure, jrandytaraborrelli.com. And you get to find out what I'm up to, and definitely pick up the book at Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com or any place that sells books.
Very good. I keep calling you Randy. Is it okay to call you Randy?
Of course.
That's what we go by? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Randy, for being on the air with us. Go get the book. It's called The Kennedy Heirs. Thank you, Randy.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. We'll be right back.
Howdy, Hey folks, RL here for Dairy Queen Silver Springs. We want to thank Marion County for 45 years of loyalty. We love this wonderful community, so come on down to Dairy Queen Silver Springs and get some of our great food and ice cream. We have a number of great meal deals that include dessert at a better price than anyone in the industry. Our products are made fresh to order just for you. Dairy Queen Silver Springs, where we always treat you like kings and queens.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages.
Fox News, I'm Chris Foster. He's held dozens of rallies throughout his time in office, but President Trump officially has kicked off his 2020 re-election campaign with an event in Orlando, Florida.
I stand before you to officially launch my campaign for a second term as President of the United States.
Democratic Party presidential candidate Bernie Sanders calls the rally an hour-and-a-half speech of lies, distortions, and total absolute nonsense. Former White House Communications Director Hope Hicks meets privately with members of the House Judiciary Committee.
Hicks was a campaign spokesperson before joining the administration. She was interviewed as part of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. The president has directed Hicks not to answer questions about her time as a senior advisor to the president, citing executive privilege. Hicks is now executive vice president and chief communications officer for Fox Corporation.
That's Fox's Jared Halpern at the Capitol. This is Fox News.
Napa know-how.
Right now, get a 5-quart jug of Napa conventional motor oil for just $11.99. That's a pretty unbelievable deal for a pretty unbelievable oil. But trust us, it's totally real, but only for a limited time. So get your 5-quart jug of Napa conventional motor oil for only $11.99 today. Quality parts, helpful people. That's Napa know-how.
Napa know-how.
General States pricing. Sales prices do not include applicable state, local taxes, or recycling fees. Limit 6 per customer. Offer ends 6/30/19.
Pros do it right by relying on trusted brands every day because your reputation depends on it. Lowe's is here to help by stocking more of those brands and at great savings too. Like 20% off in-stock GAF or Owens Corning shingles every day when you purchase by the pallet. And we now offer the Little Giant King Combo Ladder, the world's first step, extension, and leaning ladder, giving you the flexibility to do just about any job for only $159. For your next job and every job after, do it right for less. Start with Lowe's. Selection varies by location, U.S. only.
Here is your 1-minute news brief. President Donald Trump officially announced that he is running for re-election during a campaign rally last night at the Amway Center in Orlando. The president was joined by First Lady Melania Trump and Vice President Mike Pence. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis sat in the stands with Senators Marco Rubio, Rick Scott, and Lindsey Graham. More stormy weather is expected in central Florida today, coming from the Gulf of Mexico and moving across the state into the Atlantic. Look for possible flooding and gusty winds. A committee has ruled that 9 books deemed inappropriate for local students should remain on high school library shelves. Superintendent Dr. Heidi Mayer believes that only 2 of those, Killing Mr. Griffin and Angela's Ashes, should be allowed in middle school libraries. 2 Marion County nonprofits are celebrating after the county commission awarded